Well, hello again, and thank you for joining me once more. As promised, this film is my opinions, my review, my test of the Ricoh GR Digital Mark II, not to be confused with the GR Mark II. They're two quite different beasts, and I'll sort of go into that in a little bit more detail later on. I've used it now for about the last 10 days. Because the control layout is pretty much standardized across the range, I'm more interested in showing you and telling you what the camera is like actually in use, in the hand, in a real world environment. The images that you would already have seen right at the very beginning of this film are straight out of camera. Normally I'll be showing you, as we get further into the film, I'll be showing you the first image, which is the one straight out of camera, and the second image is my own personal edit. And then there are a couple of images that I've put in to illustrate certain aspects of the image making potential of this little camera. So without any further ado, I think it's about time that I stopped my usual waffling and we got down to it. Of you that are contemplating purchasing one of these, particularly if you're going online, I feel that Ricoh's designation of these models is a little bit confusing. The early models all had the word digital stamped on the front. Okay, so even though they are all digital cameras, the GR digitally marked ones are the early small sensor versions. Once they moved to the larger APS-C sensors, the word digital was dropped from the front of the camera. There is a difference in price, of course, but when you're first looking and scanning down the list of cameras, it might be helpful to realize that that's the main difference there. Physically, the later ones are larger. I'll put an image up on the screen to illustrate the difference. There's not a great deal in it, but the later GR models are slightly bigger than the early small sensor versions. Appearance is pretty much identical. There are small differences across the range, but they are all extremely compact, well built, metal bodied, compact cameras. The covering is nice. There's just enough of a grip on this. They are so small, calling it a grip is a little bit of it's pushing it really, but nevertheless the bump on the front is just enough for you to get a decent hold on it. No problem at all. On the top plate there is a power button. As soon as you press that down, the lens extends and then the cover opens and you can see that rather lovely 28mm equivalent wide angle lens. It's a nice sharp little lens. Controls on the top plate, pretty straightforward. The larger button, the sort of rounded rectangular one, is the release button. Power button I've just told you about. The main command dial here has the usual settings, program, aperture priority, manual, and a couple of scenic ones, and a couple that you can set yourself. And now it's locked in place. One of the disadvantages of a tiny camera like this is that if you're not careful, you can knock controls very easily. But the main command dial is locked in place. You have to depress this little button at the front before you can rotate it. And then again, it's locked in place. Also on the top plate, you have a hot shoe underneath the plastic cover there. And you have one of the two adjustment wheels on the top. On the back of the camera, you've got a nice clear LCD, and alongside that you have the remaining controls. You have a secondary adjustment button on the back here. You've got your main control pad, in the center of which is your menu button. You have flash, macro, and function, with a mode switch at the top, so you can switch between different modes. It does have a tiny built-in flash unit. The control switch for that is on the left-hand side of the camera. Just flick it and the little flash unit pops up. So going back to the LCD display, we have a camera symbol with the letter A in it. That at the moment corresponds to the fact that I have it in aperture priority mode. Alongside that you have the symbol for the memory card, the SD card, and alongside that the number 241, which I hope you can see there. The number 241 indicates that I can take 241 images with it set to the highest quality JPEG, so that's indicating its fine setting. 3648 is your pixel count. That's the highest resolution you have. Going clockwise, you can see that we have the aperture set at f9, and if I change the adjustment dial on the top of the camera, I'm still getting confused, it's this one on the top that you change. You can see the value changing. Just let me center it in the viewfinder, in the frame again, so you can see that changes as I alter it, and the camera will correspondingly alter the shutter speed. Continuing clockwise, bottom right you've got the battery health indicator. Bottom left hand side you've got the white balance setting, which at the moment is set for outdoors or daylight. In the middle you've got the autofocus area, which it will use, and underneath that is a additional little feature which I quite like, and it's a level indicator. If I just bring it closer to the camera, you can see that as I tilt the camera, once it's dead level it goes green, and the indicator moves progressively further left or right as I rotate the camera. You can also set the display to give you a histogram down here in the right hand side, and you've got grid lines as well. And then if you want to clear the whole lot, you can have just a blank screen. And you can see that in manual mode you've got an exposure guide with an indicator that goes up or down the scale depending on whether you are overexposing or underexposing. Now this rocker switch on the top right, it might be a bit difficult, let me see if I can get it to illuminate. There you go. So it's a rocker switch, and depending on how you've got the camera set, let me just move it back to the A for aperture priority. So we're back in aperture priority mode, and now this rocker switch allows me to give exposure compensation. Now that is at the moment, because you can program this rocker switch to change different things. You can have it to change the ISO or the white balance and stuff like that, but at the moment or down, it either increases or decreases the exposure. I believe that they quote around about 300 shots per battery charge. Now, one of the main selling points of these cameras, apart from the fact that they are so compact, is the ability to use them one-handed, and that is true. Now I've got what I like to think of as quite chubby hands, but I can use this one-handed no problem. Turn the thing on. The only thing I have to use my left hand for when using this is changing the command dial, because I just find it difficult to press that button down and rotate the dial at the same time one-handed. But leaving that aside, I can do everything with one hand. So whether it's adjusting the aperture or the shutter speed, no problem. Playback, exposure compensation, all that kind of thing can easily be done one-handed. It's an absolute joy to use this camera. And one of the images that I'm going to show you probably now was taken at pavement level, and you forget sometimes just how wonderful it is to have a camera with a shutter button on the top. Now that might sound like a stupid thing to say, but when you come from using a smartphone where usually the release button is somewhere on the screen itself or very low down on the back of the smartphone, it's flipping hard to press it when you've got the camera down so low like this, practically touching the ground, whereas with a camera with the shutter release on the top, it's a piece of cake. I did sort of skip over the snap focus mode, which, if you like, is a way of using the inherent depth of field and automating the hyperfocal distance. So you can set the focus distance dependent upon your aperture, so that the camera will lock on to that particular focus setting, making it extremely quick when you are, if you like, shooting from the hip. The indicator on the back of the camera, of course, tells you the minimum and maximum distance. So you can see that here the camera is set to 3 meters distant, in which case the depth of field is going to give you sharp focus from round about 1.5 meters to well beyond 5 meters. So that's the sort of operating range you would have, where you don't need to worry about focusing at all. Makes it ultra quick. So I wouldn't be doing a very good job if I didn't point out the disadvantages in owning and using a Ricoh GR Digital. The elephant in the room, of course, is the fact that they use a very small sensor. And a small sensor means that you tend to generate noise. And some people don't like noise. Now at ISO 80, the noise is negligible. Color balance in this JPEG is fine, no real worries whatsoever. But when we compare 4 images taken across the range from 80 up to 800 in color, you can see a distinct increase in grain and also a shift towards the magenta end of the color spectrum. Now if we compare these 3 images taken purposefully to illustrate the issue, you can see top left we have a raw DNG file at ISO 80. That's perfectly fine, good color balance, and so is the JPEG at the same ISO rating. But the JPEG rated at 1600 ISO is very much grainier, and there's a distinct shift once more to the magenta end of the spectrum. Now speaking personally, when working in color, I wouldn't want to go above 400 ISO. I think you can see in this image on the right that the grain, the noise is starting to be obtrusive, and we've just got a hint of magenta creeping into the image yet again. Now the story in black and white is rather different, because the image on the right at 800 ISO I'd be quite happy to use any day of the week. Now if you are a pixel peeper, and if you like the cleanest possible images that you can get out of your digital camera, then maybe, just maybe, the GR Digital is not the camera for you. A lot of stuff is talked about getting the film look in cameras, and a lot of the cult status of this particular camera is people saying how filmic the black and white images look, which is true. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they do look like a film camera would generate. Noise and film grain are not quite the same thing, I don't care what you say, but nevertheless you can get some stunning results out of this little camera. It's more than adequate. The advantages far outweigh any disadvantages. It's as simple as that in my book. So bottom line, would I recommend one of these? Wholeheartedly, as long as you are not expecting super clean, noise-free images that you can print up to A3, because I don't think that's going to happen. You'd certainly be able to get some very decent A4 size prints out of this, 12 by 8s, and for viewing digitally, then look no further, because these are really good camera indeed. That's my opinion. So there we are. My experience of using the GR Digital Mark II. First and foremost, I've got to say a huge thank you to Nick at During the Meanwhilest, and Dexter, of course. Mustn't ever forget Dexter. But thank you, Nick, for sending me this camera and giving me the opportunity to use it. If you're somebody who likes street photography, candid photography, and a mix of the sort of stuff that you've seen me do in the images that I've taken with this, then I think it's an absolute little belter of a camera. As a take anywhere camera that is well built with a cracking lens, good menu system, I think personally you'd go a long way to beat this. I've kind of fallen in love with it to the point where I am looking for my own example. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. None of the images are stunning. I'm the first to admit that. I'm quite happy with a couple of them, but I do hope that they illustrate the abilities together with the advantages and disadvantages of using small sensor, compact Ricoh GR Digital Mark II camera, because in my book it's an absolute winner. Hope you've enjoyed the film. Take care, stay safe, keep enjoying your photography, and most important, just get out there and take images with whatever camera you've got. So until the next time, bye bye for now.